Yeah, so we got to remember that back at this time, there's no first presidency, there's no quorum of the 12, there's no quorum of the 70, and there's a lot of decisions to be made, right? They don't have a church general handbook. And so Joseph is convening and bringing the brethren together, the church members, to discuss things. So I'm glad you wrote this down, because if you look at the word conference, it actually means to confer, right? Where you discuss together. And even though Joseph Smith is the prophet, he's received lots of revelations. He's not simply saying, hey, God, we're all just going to sit around waiting for you to tell us every last thing we need to know. Instead, what does he do? He gets the brethren together. Let's raise a question. Here's some things that we have to work through, and let's discuss it together. And they make lots of decisions, and yet even in the middle of that, sometimes God says, hey, good job. Let me give you some additional insight. For example, they did 4 sessions here over a number of days, somewhere between like November 1st to November 12th. And they'd always assign a different person to be the moderator. Oliver Cowdery, I think, was for session 1. We're not sure about session 2. And William McClellan was the moderator for sessions 3 and 4. But after the first session, it's a noon break, and he receives section 1. Right? And it's just interesting how God works, that God allows us to work through the messiness of discussion and talking and making decisions. And sometimes we do things that might be wrong. And God doesn't always just stop us in the middle of a conversation like, well, you're wrong about thinking that. He lets us work through the messy middle.
It's fascinating to me to sit with people in conference or in council. And it's this old notion that you've heard before. President Ballard has emphasized this counseling with our councils. Elder Neil L. Anderson has used the phrase multiple times. Revelation is scattered among us. So it's this idea of, now let me use a couple of different colors here to signify, if this is what we're trying to figure out, what God wants us to do, the beauty of a conference or the beauty of a council is that person A comes in and they bring this perspective, and person B brings this perspective of that issue, and person C has this kind of experience, and person D might have these life experiences and these things. You'll notice they have some things that aren't accurate, that fall outside of the realm of truth, things as they really are. But the beauty of a conference, the beauty of a council, whether it's in a hierarchical structure of the church or in a patriarchal or familial structure of the home, when husband and wife come together equally yoked with their children and counsel together in love and in righteousness, then it's amazing when we stop trying to defend our position and say that represents truth, things as they really are, but rather to say, let's confer. The revelation is scattered among us. And I appreciate the fact that it doesn't matter the setting when you bring the best that everybody has to offer together, you get a more complete picture. So in this case, there was some error, there were some things that don't fit, but by the time you're done counseling, you don't have all of God's truth in this little diagram, in this perspective. But notice what you do have. You'd be missing this part until we bring somebody in who maybe comes from a different background or upbringing than you. And over here, you get the idea. Conference, counseling, revelation is scattered among us. This is a principle of the gospel that you will see throughout scriptures, but nowhere more obviously than in the Doctrine and Covenants and in church history, because of what Taylor's saying. When you don't have a first presidency and a quorum of the 12 and a quorum of the 70, they're trying to figure this out, and then on those beautiful occasions when God says, okay, you've done the best you can, you've done your due diligence, now let me give you some of these missing pieces that you don't have yet scattered among you. I'll help you with. I'll help you fill in the big spaces that are missing.
And what's also cool about this is when they're done, they get unified in their witness and their testimony of what they're going to teach and what they're going to do. In fact, God asked them after the end of these conferences, I want you to be unified and testify together. Let's also just, as you're erasing that, write out this word. We have these two words, counsel and counsel, right? In English, they sound the same. You know, the top one, counsel, is a group of people who end up counseling together. And this is the very part we're talking about, is the power that happens when you talk with other people and actually listen to other people and hear other perspectives and consider other people's viewpoints. And God asks us in families, in marriages, and in the church to counsel with one another, not to dominate, not say, I'm always right and you got to listen to me. But the joy of life is God has given us an opportunity to work in a messy world to figure out the best we can. And sometimes God will come in and insert himself with a very clear revelation. And sometimes he's like, you know, I want you to act and learn.
So in a marriage, in a family, in a work setting, in a church setting, what an amazing thing when the leader or leaders of that, whatever that organization or family may be, when they say, let's counsel until it becomes clear what the right answer is. Far better to come up with something that represents us under inspiration than me alone in isolation from my own set of experiences and constraints. It'll be a happier marriage, a happier family, a happier organization, a happier ward when we don't dominate, but rather when we counsel with our counsels.
I've had so many, well, at the end they were joyful experiences. When I came into a conversation, even in my marriage, where like I start talking, I'm like, I agree with myself. So that must be the right thing, because I agree with myself. And my wife would bring a perspective. And there's one particular story. Some years ago, my car died. So I had to get a new car. Well, I had to get another car, a used car.
A used car.
And this is totally true. I literally was about to sign the papers. I'd done the drive. I checked it all out. I'm at the dealership. All I had to do was just sign, and the car was mine. Well, after paying for it. But I told the sales guy, let me just check with my wife one more time. We'd already talked about it like 3 or 4 times. I call her up, and she's like, actually, I've been having some additional thoughts. I think we need to get something else. And I remember just like, what? And she's like, let's get ourselves a van. And I wanted a smaller car for myself. I'm like, why do we need a van? You know, we had 2 kids at the time. She's like, that way we can drive the neighborhood kids to school. Now, we had really young kids this time. I'm like, I'm not thinking I need to go buy a neighborhood bus. Well, let's fast forward a bunch of years. My wife was right, by the way. But it took me a while to come to terms with the fact that she was right. And I have to tell you, the number of times over the last 6 or 7 years, and currently, like today, I just dropped off the kids. I was driving a bus full of kids with our van. And I'll come home and say, you were so absolutely wise to encourage me not to sign that paper, because our life circumstances were going to change and we would need to be being good neighbors. And there's just this joy when you listen to other people and get outside of like, yeah, I agree with myself. There's real power in learning to agree with others.
Isn't it amazing to finish this up? That there are really kinds of 3 levels here. There's the me level, and then when you're in that group, that organization, whether it be a marriage or a ward or whatever it may be, it's the we level. But the ultimate level is when you can have those 2 combine with the level. When you can involve all of those layers and levels in this decision-making process, in this conferring together. It's not just me conferring with myself. It's like the old cliche or the old saying of course I speak to myself. I sometimes need expert opinion. That just doesn't work very well in a marriage. That doesn't work very well in a ward or in a work setting even. When you can really expand that out, you're going to be better. But it's out here where, so you go good, better, best. when you can involve the Lord and people all around you in making those decisions, which Joseph is modeling that over and over and over again. And there are times when the voice of the Lord is very clear, and even though people are trying to encourage him otherwise, he learned some lessons about giving in to other people's opinion when he already knew what the Lord's view on it is. And that's what you also see in our church today. Occasionally where you get modifications or adjustments to policies or procedures or certain things that we do in the church, it's as if the Lord has spoken to our prophets, seers, and revelators, and though we may have lots of questions out here about how to implement what they're telling us to do, the reality is the direction was clear, so now we move forward.